Okay, I think I can start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar that will show you how to integrate ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. My name is Carlos Pereira da Cruz, and I'm an author at 𝗵𝗲𝗶𝘀𝗲. I do quite a lot of ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 consulting and training, but also auditing as lead auditor. So today I'm going to share with you my thoughts about integrating ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. Now, as usual, my presentation will last about 40 minutes, followed by a 20-minute Q&A session. If you have a question, you don't need to wait for the Q&A session. Feel free to ask it during my presentation by clicking the Q&A icon and submitting your question, or making comments if you are watching through LinkedIn or YouTube. Naturally, during the Q&A session, I also address your remaining inquiries. Okay, if you click on the chat icon right now, so you can download the PDF and out of this presentation and access links to articles that will be published during it. Okay, so later we'll send you an email with a link to the recording of this webinar and the list of articles mentioned. So let's see. So this topic is important because integrating 9001 and 14001 simplifies your management system, reduces duplication, and increases efficiency, allowing companies to align quality and environmental objectives under one coherent structure. So I'm going to show a step-by-step approach to integrating 9001 and 14001, covering similarities, differences, and practical implementation steps. And this webinar is basically for professionals managing ISO systems, especially those with ISO 9001 already in place and that want to implement and integrate 14001, but also including quality managers, environmental managers, auditors, and project leaders. So let's say there are many things in common in both standards, okay? Even more than it seems at first sight, especially after the 2015 version of both standards and incorporation of Annex SL, or what we call now the high-level structure, okay? So both standards have the same number of clauses for the same requirements, so they are very similar, okay? Although obviously still have different approaches and many other differences, okay? Now, just one first question here is from Bonaventure. Bonaventure asked, does this assist with ISO 45001 also? Yes, the answer is yes. ISO 45001 follows the same high-level structure like 9001 and ISO 14001. And by the way, I think that ISO 45001 has a very similar approach to ISO 14001. So this also applies to 45001. Now, let's see the agenda for today. We'll discuss the following topics. First, we will start with the similarities between the two standards, and then we will discuss the differences between the ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 standards. Later, we'll talk about the issues or some issues of implementation and roles, okay, within the implementation process. Then we will continue with the steps in the implementation, and we will finish with the challenges in integration of both standards in a single management system based on the questions that we received before this webinar, okay? So let's see first the similarities. So after the publication of the standards in 2015, both 9001 and 14001, now with that, we find a lot of similarities, or more similarities than in the previous versions, okay? So what kind of similarities? Of course, we have the PDCA cycle. It's still considered a very practical tool and a good way to implement and maintain the standard. So this part is maintained from previous versions, so continues since the beginning, okay, of the series of 9001 and 14001, so the PDCA cycle. The second would be the high-level structure. So we understand by high-level structure this part of the standard where there are 10 clauses, and basically there are the same clauses for the same requirements in both standards. So this high-level structure makes much easier integration. Also, we have the context of the organization, which is in clause 4. So along with this requirement is determining the interested parties, so context, interested parties. So yeah, there are some differences in very specific things, but basically we can also integrate this. There is also the leadership, so clause 5, which in both clauses has to comply with involvement of senior management or top management in implementation of the implementation and maintenance of the and improvement of the management system. Then there will be competence and awareness. So both standards require organizations to determine the training needs. Not so much training needs, okay. It's more like competency gaps in order to acquire the necessary competence to develop the processes. So this can be done conducting training for the existing employees or for hiring new personnel, like the onboarding process. Then we have the documented information. So this requirement is completely the same for both standards. Then we find the requirements of monitoring and measurement. So the use of key performance indicators for the processes is emphasized, but the requirement is practically the same. So we have for an environment and for quality. The internal audit is the same in terms of its planning and implementation, but obviously the requirements of the standards or the criteria are different. Then we have the management review, where the requirements are also the same, although there are some inputs and some outputs that are slightly different. And there are also non-conformities and corrective actions that are the same for both standards, okay? Now, I leave here the link for 2 articles that you can check later: how to integrate ISO 14001 and ISO 9001. And the other one is ISO 14001-2015 integration with ISO 9001-2015. What has changed? Now, let's see the differences, okay? So while ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 share a common structure, their intent and applications diverge significantly, especially when it comes to operational focus, so clause 4, and interested party orientation. So in this slide, we have the most relevant differences you should consider when integrating the 2 standards. So we have the process focus, okay, clause 8. So ISO 9001 places a strong emphasis on process definition and control, especially in areas such as design and development, production, service provision, purchasing, and sales. Okay, so these are all detailed in clause 8 and are central to managing product and service quality. ISO 14001, while it also has an operational planning and control, so the clause 8.1, focus instead on controlling environmental impacts rather than product or service conformity. Okay. Now, we have also in 9001, we have customer orientation and satisfaction. So ISO 9001 is almost uniquely customer driven. So it requires monitoring customer satisfaction as a performance indicator, or at least the perception of customer satisfaction. A system for managing complaints, so clause 8.2.1. Also clause 5.1.2 about the customer focus. So, and this kind of approach is absent in ISO 14001, okay, which is more focused on engaging interested parties in a more broad fashion, so in relation to environmental expectations and compliance obligations, but not specifically customer experience per se. So we have, for the ISO 14001, we have the very specific, so we have these environmental aspects and impact. So ISO 14001 introduces requirements for determining environmental aspects, elements of the organization activities and that interact with the environment, and assessing their significant impacts. Okay, so we identify the environmental aspects and impacts, and then we evaluate and assess what are the significant impacts. Those must be determined using set criteria and regularly reviewed. ISO 9001 does not include this concept. We have the operational controls for aspects and risks, clause 8.1. So in ISO 14001, organizations must establish operational controls specifically to manage significant environmental aspects and associated risks and opportunities. So this includes documented procedures, maintenance schedules, or behavioral controls where needed. So ISO 9001 controls are typically focused on quality, consistency, and defect prevention in outputs. Okay. Now we have also emergency preparedness and response, clause 8.2, typical of ISO 14001. So only ISO 14001 requires organizations to plan for environmental emergencies, such as chemical spills or air emissions. The organization must define response procedures, conduct training, and test the effectiveness of those responses. Something entirely different, I would say, in ISO 9001. And then at the end, we have this compliance obligation. So ISO 14001 includes extensive focus on legal and regulatory compliance related to environmental matters, so clause 6.1.3, including obligations from permits, local laws, or voluntary commitments. While ISO 9001 in clause 7.5 speaks about external documents, also requires compliance with applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, its treatment is more product-related and less expansive. Okay, so there are some sectors where almost no regulation or applicable legislation exists for products, but for other areas, okay, like pharma, yeah, there we have much more. So in short, while the structure is aligned, the core emphasis differs. Okay, 9001 is focused on product and service quality and customer satisfaction, whereas ISO 14001 is centered on environmental performance, compliance, and impact mitigation. So understanding these differences is critical to achieving meaningful integration without losing the intent of either standard. Okay. So we have here a question from Sajad. We also focus to integrate ISO 14001 to ISO 14001, but okay, we will not speak about that here today because first, I'm not an expert in ISO 45001, so I can not help you. Okay. Now let's go to some implementation issues. Okay. We have here. So what we are going to talk about now are the most usual questions regarding the integration of the two standards. Okay, so the first and easiest question to answer is the question of whether the QMS and EMS should be integrated into a single integrated management system. And of course, the answer is affirmative, okay, since the best way to maintain both standards, the certificate and the management systems, and really get benefits for the company is to integrate both standards in a single management system. In this way, it is possible to reduce the amount of documentation, also the amount of duplicated processes and duplicated activities. So therefore, integrating the systems in a single integrated management system will save time that can be invested in other tasks and also avoid wasting resources, especially those related to personnel. So of course, joining the documents is not enough. It's not just having common procedures. It's more than that. Okay, it's something like, for example, so having a common doing internal audits, asking questions regarding quality and environment when preparing a management review with include inputs from the environment and from quality. Yeah, I will answer some questions during the Q&A. I have 1 or 2 slides about questions that I've received before this webinar concerning how to do this. For example, auditing a particular process or a particular department, and using in the same audit asking questions from environment and from quality. So in addition to joining some of the documents such as the quality manual, the procedures for conducting the internal audit, what really has to be done is to apply the requirements of both standards to the processes. Okay. So for this, the best way to do this is by incorporating environmental operational controls into processes. So, for example, if there is a design and development process, it will be necessary to take into account the applicable environmental operational controls. Or, for example, in the production process, it will also be necessary to include these environmental operational controls in the production procedures. So this is undoubtedly one of the greatest evidence that the system is integrated and effective. So I would say that something like this: why the organization exists? Okay, because the organization is to deliver something for the outside world. So something, a product or service to customers. So first thing, we need to define the processes. We have a quality management system because we need to serve those customers. Okay, and while serving those customers, at the same time, we want to comply, we want to improve we want to comply with the regulation, and also we want to improve our relationship with the environment. So, and the organization doesn't exist to comply with the environment. It exists to serve the customers, and while doing that, we want to comply and improve our relationship with the environment. That's why the basis that I like to use as the basis the processes of 9001 of the quality. So on the other hand, in the implementation and integration of management systems, this document PAS 99 integrated management was published with specifications for integrated management standards. So it's a framework to manage several management systems in a single system. This document is available, is publicly available, and can be of great help in the integration of management systems. Okay. The last issue, is to join quality policy and environmental policy. So in my opinion, the union of these two documents is really a sign that the systems have been integrated, since the policy represents the general and strategic direction that the company follows, and evidence that the organization is clear about what it wants to achieve as to the quality of its products and services, customer satisfaction, and that it is committed to the environment in relation, for example, to the prevention of pollution. When you have a single document that covers all these topics, you can consider that that's a good basis to define the objectives, and to start having an integrated management system. So I leave here a link for an article called "How to Implement Integrated Management Systems." And I question, Javier asked, what about waste disposal? Yes, so it's the same. So we are, for example, we are providing a service, or we are manufacturing a product and producing a product, and while doing that, we will generate wastes. So, and we need to treat those wastes, provide them what to do those wastes. Will we reutilize internally? We will send to recycling? Will be to a landfill? What? And so that's integrated in the management system. So, let's see here now roles, implementing this integrated management system. So the next big issue in the implementation and subsequent maintenance of the project will be how to distribute the functions and responsibilities within the integrated management system. So having a management representative, so it's no longer in the standards, but it's useful. Having a management representative who coordinates the activities, who collects system reports, can be beneficial to the integrated management system. The next important position is that of the person responsible for the environment, or someone who could be in charge of the environmental issues, and ISO 14001 within this integrated management system. In small companies, these functions, as well as quality issues, will fall on a single person. Although if the company has at least, I don't know, perhaps more than 50 people, 50 employees, it would be better to have two people, since each of the standards requires a different set of knowledge. So When implementing the standard and starting this project, it is very positive, if possible, to carry out implementation of the standard as a project. So in those cases, it will be necessary to have a project team and a project leader. So in my opinion, it's better for the quality manager to be the project leader. Okay, but again, you will need people with different knowledge of quality and environment. And the most important people that should be considered to be part of this project are those responsible for the processes. For example, the production manager, the supply manager, the sales manager, and these types of positions within the company, what is considered the middle class management staff. So thus the implementation process can be carried out more effectively and quickly if the responsibilities are shared and each department does its part of the work regarding both 9001 and ISO 14001. So, for example, when identifying the aspects, it is better for each department to do it on its own, since the staff of each department is the one who knows their own processes best. In addition, the more people involved in implementation project, the later maintenance of the standard will be facilitated. Okay. So, and of course, for every project within the organization to be successful in the company, it is necessary to have the support of top management. Okay. And for this reason, it is also good to define the sponsor of the project at the beginning. So that person that can, let us say, help when a special help is needed during the implementation. So I leave here the links for some articles. What is the job of the quality manager according to 9001? Is one article. The other one is, what is the job of the environmental management system manager? How to get management buy-in for an ISO 14001 project. And the last one here is 4 crucial techniques to convince your top management about ISO 9001 implementation. Now, one question here is 2 questions here. Armand asked, how do I get top management to buy into the integrated management system? So I think the better way is to show business value. Okay, one system saves time. So one integrated system saves time and cost by eliminating duplications, linking quality and environmental objectives to strategy, improving compliance and risk control, and strengthening a reputation with customers, regulators, and investors. So use clear evidence of benefits, not just compliance arguments. Okay. Another question. Mick asks, how can I demonstrate compliance to the legal requirements in ISO 14001? Okay, so I will answer about that later during the Q&A, okay, because it's not so specific about the integration, but more about the ISO 14001. So another question here. Noel and Anjanette asked, what benefits do we expect from integrating the 2 standards? Oh, okay. We expect, I think, benefits, something like 1 management system instead of 2, which reduces duplication of documents, of audits, and management reviews. Consistent processes that address both quality and environmental requirements together. Better risk management by linking customer satisfaction with environmental performance. And improved efficiency and credibility with interested parties, showing that we manage quality and sustainability in a coordinated way. Okay. Now, let's go now for the implementation steps. Okay, so let's start with the steps of implementation. The first step would be the context of the organization. Okay, so the context of the organization provides the basis on which the management system will be built. Okay, regarding the ISO 9001, it will be necessary to determine all internal and external issues that may affect the quality of products and services and consumer satisfaction. While on the other hand, in ISO 14001, we will have to define all internal and external issues related to environmental protection. So basically, it's the same activity, but dealing with different topics. Okay. During the Q&A, I will present a slide to help me answer a question that I received. The question was something like, how to avoid the 9001 bias when we are doing this context analysis, okay, for an integrated management system, okay. Also within the internal context is the organizational culture, the communication process in the company, the level of training and awareness. Now, regarding the external context of the organization, it will be necessary to study the situation in the market and the opinion of consumers or customers in the case of 9001, while regarding ISO 14001, it will be necessary to determine the environmental conditions in the region in which the organization is located or nearby. And in many cases, governmental institutions already have some analysis on the environmental situation that can be of great value when determining the external context related to ISO 14001. So, in my opinion, it can be very helpful to have a procedure for determining the context of the organization in which it is defined, who will be involved, which elements will be examined, and how often it will be carried out. So this procedure is not mandatory, okay, but I think it's useful. Okay, so the next step would be to define the policy of the QMS and the QMS and the environmental management system, or the integrated management system. So if you decide to define it separately or a single policy, if you opt for a single document. So the purpose of these policies or the policy of the integrated management system, the IMS, is to define the strategic direction of the organization with respect to customer satisfaction, quality, and environmental protection, what needs to be achieved, what the company is committed to, and also to include some commitments that are necessary to have within those policies. So, such as commitments to comply with legal requirements, the continual improvement. So it is probably better to have only one policy for both standards, because in this way shows that it is an efficient company that tries to avoid duplication of documentation, and also because we want, I think that it's better when we need to comply with the legislation, but at the same time we want that our environmental management system, or the part of the environmental part of integrated management system, is aligned with what we want to achieve in terms of the business. Okay, so I think that's important. So the next step will be to provide resources. Okay, so this step corresponds to clause 7 of the standards, which contains the most common requirements of both standards, so control of records and documents, competence, awareness, and others. For this reason, I consider that before going into more detail to define other processes, define at the beginning of the procedure, so define at the beginning the procedure for the control of records and documents, okay? That is, how will those documents be, the format, how will they be identified, who will be responsible, how do you control those documents? The next step would correspond to addressing risks and opportunities related to both quality and environmental protection. So this can be carried out the same process shared by both standards. Again, it is necessary to address those risks and opportunities that arise from the context of the organization, so it can be part of the same process. So, risks regarding the organization, okay, considering clauses 4.1 and 4.2, risks regarding products and services, risks regarding the activities, so risks regarding the processes. So it's not mandatory to define any methodology, procedure, or similar things, but it will be also necessary to define those risks and opportunities with respect to the organization and take actions to address those risks and opportunities, at least those that are considered relevant, significant, important. So the most advisable thing is to develop some type of register of risks and opportunities and actions taken to address them. In reality, there is no strict requirement to how to document those risks and opportunities, but in the management review, it will be necessary to evaluate the effects of the actions taken to address the risks and opportunities. So it's better to have some record to make it easier to compare before and after, and if the actions were effective. Yeah. Later, it will be necessary to determine the environmental aspects. Okay, this determination has to be carried out process by process. Since in this way the process approach will be demonstrated. Okay, so we want to to follow the process approach. But at the same time, it provides us with the necessary information to know exactly where to establish the operational controls that come later. Okay, so in that way, the procedures, operational controls that we develop to consider to improve the relationship with the environment are integrated, embedded in the procedures to do the business, to manufacture or to provide a service. So in terms of the life cycle, very important, life cycle, it will be necessary to first identify the phases of the life cycle of the product or service, and then determine the environmental aspects and impacts related to each of the phases of that cycle. And of course, to establish operational controls on the extension in what it is possible to mitigate and the consequences of environmental impacts. So for example, in some cases, after producing the product and leaving the organization, you will not have much to do with how that product will be handled or managed. So what can be done as operational control is to write user instructions, for example, for the consumer end or similar things. By the way, last month, okay, in the European Union, legislation is coming regarding in the textiles and shoe industry to make this circulation. So to make it to improve the rates of recycling of textile materials, for example. So yeah, that changes a lot of things regarding the after the company, after leaving the company, after product leaving the company, much more demanding in the future. So the next step will be the evaluation of environmental aspects, for which it is necessary to develop some kind of methodology and criteria for such evaluation. So it can be something simple, such as impact, consequence, and probability, or a different set of criteria can be defined. Okay, so once the context of the organization, risks, and environmental aspects have been defined, is a good time to define the objectives, okay? And this can be done at the same time for both standards, since the requirements for the two standards are the same. So SMART, okay, must be intelligent by its acronym in English, so objectives must be SMART, so specific, measurable, so achievable, realistic, and programmable, so in terms of time frame. A period of time necessary to determine whether the objectives have been achieved or not. It will also be necessary to define responsibilities and actions to achieve those objectives, and both have to be documented. The next step is to make this plan work by establishing operational controls for both 9001 and 14001. Regarding the 9001 standard, it is necessary to define operational controls for the processes, that is, to determine the inputs and outputs, records, if the procedures are going to be documented or not, work instructions for different processes such as sales, purchase, production, etc. On the other hand, the ISO 14001 requires defining operational controls for those significant environmental aspects, although this standard also has other requirements for processes such as for purchase, so where suppliers need to be evaluated if they are following any type of environmental protection system, for example, or as in design and development, where it is also necessary to consider environmental protection within this process or within the planning of a new product or service. I remember about 20 years ago, so many years ago, I was working with a company implementing a quality management system. It was already implemented, but they saw a kind of a standard, or not a standard, but a European document about with some ideas regarding reducing or making the organizations or the products more efficient in terms of the environment, reducing consumption of raw materials without affecting the performance of the products. And I remember that we made an experiment with that, following that approach in the design and development. And it was very interesting because it was like those fruits that are very low hanging and that are very easy to catch, because they could find very easily some ideas to reduce raw material consumption without compromising the product. Was really interesting. So once the controls are established, it is good to establish KPIs, or key performance indicators, which will tell you if the system is working and giving the results that were expected or not. We are going to say that the result of this step would be to carry out the monitoring and measurement from the satisfaction of the client, going through the measurement and monitoring of the environmental aspects and the operational controls. So we monitor. Then there is the audit, which is very similar in terms of planning and implementation, although there are different requirements, of course. So I recommend to have only one process, okay, and a single program in which it is decided which processes will be audited, when and how they will be audited, whether for both standards at the same time or for each of them separately. And this depends entirely on the organization, its needs, or the kind of auditors that you can work with. Later, we will have the management review. So in this step, my advice is to carry out at the same time for both standards. Once all the information for the management review has been collected, a meeting is organized with the top management where all the entries are discussed, and subsequently new objectives are defined, new actions to address recent opportunities, and etc. And the final step is the implementation and maintenance of the system, is continual improvement or corrective actions and non-conformities. So the requirements are basically the same for both standards, and this can be done with the same records, same procedures, etc. Okay, so you will find all the necessary templates in our ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 integrated documentation toolkit. Okay, so let me show how it looks like. Okay, let me show here. So this is, let me see here. Okay, this is the list of all the documents that we have in the toolkit. So we have procedures, we have forms, we have guidelines. So let's see here. So yeah, okay. For example, as you see, we have here procedure for identification of evaluation of environmental aspects and risks. We have here these ones here are for the quality, clause 8, 8.5, so very specific of the economic sector. But we have also here for very specific for the kind of environmental aspects, so like waste tire management or waste vehicles management or electronic waste management. Yeah. Okay, so let me show you a procedure. Okay, so this procedure here as an example. So this is a Word document. It's completely customizable. We have here some links for articles that can help for some ideas that may be relevant for your organization. Yeah. So as you see here, so this one here, we have here for both internal internal and external context, considering environment and quality. Okay, and let me show you as an example a form. Okay, list of interested parties, legal and other requirements. So yeah, we have here. Okay, it's also, this one is also completely customizable. You can customize these to your particulars of your organization. Now, let's see what are the main challenges. Okay, so based on the questions received before this webinar, so the main challenges in integration are: what are the integration benefits? And I already spoke about that. Several questions also about perform integrated audits. Okay, so my advice is run a single audit program with a common plan, checklist, and report, but tag each finding, don't forget that, to each relevant clause. Auditors need dual competence. Okay, so they need to competence for being auditors, but they need also to evidence that they know both standards. Yeah, and so yeah, this one here, okay, perform integrated audits, and yeah, this topic, avoid quality bias. I will speak about that during the Q&A. Okay, but it's a relevant question because if I'm a quality manager working with a quality management system already in place, now I want to start implementing an integrated management system, what can happen is that I will see everything with the eyes of quality, okay, and but we need to see also with the glasses, with the filter of the environment, okay. I will present a way of an example of how we can do that, okay. Now, so to conclude, as you can see, using the right implementation sequence and focusing on the most important documents will speed up your implementation project. So, and for that purpose, you can use 𝗣𝗲𝗴𝗏's ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 integrated documentation toolkit. So here's the link with more details. I'll also send you now the meeting link to schedule a call with our toolkit expert, okay? He'll explain you how toolkit works and show you any document you'd like to see, okay? So here's the toolkit expert meeting link, okay? So now let's go to the Q&A. So some of you requested some tips about how to implement a QMS. We in 𝗣𝗲𝗴𝗏 developed a course for all that want to implement a management system for their organization or as external consultants. So you can go and watch these videos for free. You don't need to pay. Okay, the video lectures are free. Perhaps they could help you in your journey. So we have the ISO 9001 lead implementer course, but we also have the ISO 14001 lead implementer course. We have the ISO 9001 2015 foundations course, so the one that is very more detailed or focused on the standard itself. We have also the one for the 14001. Now, before we begin with the question and answer session, just to mention that you can also ask me anything about ISO 14001 or 9001 directly. Just send me an email and I'll answer as quick as I can, okay? So if you have to leave before this Q&A session is over, please do fill in the short survey that will open right after you leave the webinar, okay? So let's see. We have here a question from Karen. Karen asked, and I hope I understand your question, Karen, because it's long. So we are developing an integrated management system for our headquarters and 6 European subsidiaries covering 9001 and 14001. At present, only one company is ISO 14001 certified, and some subsidiaries are ISO 9001 certified, but not under an integrated management system. Okay, so our plan is not to certify ISO 14001 at a group integrated management system level, but to maintain ISO 9001 certification at subsidiary level. Okay, so is it feasible to structure the EMS this way with ISO 14001 applied at group level and ISO 9001 certified individually by subsidiaries? Given that the maturity of the companies differs significantly? Well, it is feasible, okay? It is feasible, okay? But you must be clear, okay, about what is, in terms of scope, what is at group level, what is implemented at group level, what is implemented at site level or a subsidiary level, okay? My advice would be, so contact your certification body, okay? They can help you answering these kind of questions regarding the scope, because sometimes we have difficulties or we have doubts about can we do this scope? Can we make this part of the scope in one site and part of the scope in another site or something like that? And there's no problem in asking your certification body. And I would say that they will be glad to give you an advice on that, okay? Because it's you can hear my advice, my answer. It is feasible, but then you get an auditor that for some reason doesn't, a certification auditor doesn't agree with that, and okay, we have a problem. So it's better to contact the certification body in advance, okay, to and ask them, okay. That's why. So last week, I think it was last week, we were speaking about implementing ISO 14001, and I said that I like to, when I'm working with an organization, I like to choose the certification body not at the end of the project, but somehow in the middle of the project. Why? Because sometimes we have this kind of doubts, this kind of questions, and we want to ask, okay? We are not asking them how to develop, how to implement the management system, but this kind of questions regarding the scope, okay? Yeah. Now, another question is Inet asked, how will the new revision of ISO 9001 affect integrated systems? And is there an expectation for a revision of ISO 14001 in the near future? Okay, so the upcoming revision of ISO 9001 will require integrated systems to review and update their processes. Okay, but however, since the Annex SL structure remains unchanged, so integration with ISO 14001 will be straightforward. Okay, I think there's no problem. As for ISO 14001, an ISO this version is under development, but has not been published yet. Okay, I must confess that I already went check in the ISO site two times this month to check if it's already published or not, because I'm expecting that, that it will be published very soon. Okay, so Dirk asked, so there's a question here from Mary. Mary, I will show the presentation slide of the similarities later, okay? So we have a question here from Dirk. Dirk question, this question was asked before the webinar. So Dirk asked, tips for auditing integrated management systems, so 9001 and 14001. So when auditing an integrated management system, I like to focus on processes rather than clauses, because processes is what people do, is how they normally act. Okay, if you speak in terms of processes, they understand. If you speak in terms of clauses, only the quality and environmental management know, nobody else knows. Okay, so plan audits around how activities are performed and check how quality and environmental requirements are addressed together. So use the PDCA cycle to structure questions, verify both compliance and effectiveness, and always seek evidence of integration. So one set of objectives, one set of processes, common controls, and combined records. Pay attention to risk management, so legal compliance, stakeholder needs, or interested party needs, and continual improvement. So let me show you an example. So consider that we are auditing the purchasing, not the purchasing process, okay, or so the purchasing process. So we can think about this audit objective to evaluate whether the procurement process is effectively planned, implemented, and controlled, considering 9001 and 14001, to confirm that the risks and opportunities related to suppliers are managed to support integrated management system intended outcomes. Now, what kind of questions can I ask? Okay, so I can, regarding, so this, I can ask questions like about the process definition. So show me how the procurement process is defined. So who is responsible, what steps are followed, and what criteria are applied. So this is our, let's say, agnostic, not so much about quality or environment. It's okay about the process. Then I can ask questions about the requirements. So for example, for suppliers, how are supplier requirements communicated? Do they include both product quality specifications and environmental criteria? So for example, we want that suppliers somehow work to reduce packaging weight, okay, for example, or avoid hazardous substances in the future. So about, for example, supplier evaluation. Show me recent supplier evaluations. How do you assess suppliers for both quality, performance, and environmental compliance? So monitoring performance. So what indicators do you use to monitor suppliers? So for example, things like one-time delivery, defect rate, and environmental incidents, for example. Another question could be about improvement. Can you give me, this is kind of question that I like to ask organizations. Can you give me an example of an improvement action taken when a supplier failed either a quality or environmental requirement? So, okay, so it's a set of questions regarding quality and environment. Another one could be, so an item 6 could be something like verification of received, oh, sorry, let me see. It's okay. Verification of received supply. So let's check a received supply in place. Okay. How is inspection status identified? That's quality. What quality control checks have been performed? That's quality. And what measures are used to prevent emergency situations? So, for example, are they using, if it is applicable, retention basins? Spill kits are available, or pallets for hazardous materials? And so this way we audit the two things together. Okay. Now, another question is from Mary. Mary asked, which are mandatory documents required in both standards? Okay, so I leave here the links for two articles. One article is ISO 9001 documentation requirements, the complete list. And the other one is list of mandatory documents required by ISO 14001. Okay, so but if I think on in those articles, you can see the mandatory documents, mandatory records, and okay, and those normally used but not mandatory records and documents. But in terms of documents, mandatory documents for ISO 9001, this is what is in. This is what's in the standard. I'm not totally okay. This is what's in the standard as mandatory. Okay, for quality. And I say, okay, there's a little bit difference. A lot of auditors consider that the last one, criteria for evaluation and selection of suppliers, clause 8.4.1, is mandatory. Okay, I don't agree with that. So I would do something like this. Okay, I remove from here. And fortunately, about 2 years ago, the technical committee 176, they have a site where they answer to specific, okay, to doubts or to questions, and they answer to this question and say, this document is not mandatory. Hallelujah. Okay, so ISO 9001 is there. Now, the other for the ISO 14001, we have this a longer list. Okay, for ISO 14001, longer list of documents. These two here are in blue just to remind me that they are mandatory when the organization considers that they are necessary to control, to mitigate the environmental aspects and impacts. Okay. Now, okay. So Amadou asked, how is the organizational context determined without bias to ISO 9001? So how do you, my answer starts with a question is, how do you determine the organizational context? Okay, so if you do a simple brainstorming, you might be influenced by ISO 9001 more than you want. Okay, I minimize this by developing the organizational context based on the objectives and intended results of the management system. So let's take a practical case of a manufacturing company to illustrate how the organizational context supports an integrated management system. Suppose the company has I set two objectives. Okay, so a quality objective is, so this is not smart here, it's just, okay, just a quality objective is we want to reduce delivery delays, and the environmental objective is we want to reduce CO2 emissions. Okay, so to understand the context, you can identify internal and external issues that can either help or hinder the achievement of these objectives. So something like this: what can help or hinder our ability to achieve the quality objective? Okay, and we can think of things like this. So limited flexibility in scheduling may cause bottlenecks and affect on-time delivery. Okay. Insufficient operator skills or lack of cross-training can slow down production and create delays. So internal issue. So we are thinking, focusing our attention, what in our organization can make more difficult to achieve the objective, because here I consider only the negative things. I don't consider what can help us. And external things like inconsistent supply of critical raw materials may hinder the ability to meet promised lead times. Okay, so like for example, in the United States, there was recently a fire in a company manufacturing aluminium for 40% of the automotive industry in the United States. You'll have problems. Oh, I just read today that auto industry in Europe will have problems for some chips. Okay, manufactured in the Netherlands. Okay, so things like that. Transport logistic constraints, carrier delays, or congestion in distribution channels may affect timely delivery to customers. Now, let's see the other part, the environmental part, the environmental objective. Environmental objective of reducing CO2 emissions. What can help or hinder our ability to achieve? And now we focus our attention in, or our brainstorming is not completely free, but is constrained by the objective. And we can think of things like this. So to reduce CO2 emissions. So we have older machines with high energy consumption, make it harder to cut emissions, something internal. Inefficient workflows, increase unnecessary movements, energy use and emissions, or dependence on fossil fuel-based electricity in the region increases baseline emissions. Stricter environmental regulations and customer expectations demand faster reduction in carbon footprint. So that's the approach that I use to reduce the bias, the quality bias. Okay. So Mick asked before, how can I demonstrate compliance to the legal requirements in ISO 14001? I know I need a legal register, okay, but how can I evidence compliance to the requirement? Okay, so it's like this. According to clause 6.1.3, okay, we need to have some way of showing that we know what is the applicable legislation or regulation, okay? Then we need to show, it's not just saying, oh, it's regulation A. Okay, that's not enough. Regulation A may be applicable to our organization. Now, what we need to do is also, okay, but what are the requirements? You're kind of making a distillation, okay, of regulation A. And so the regulation A, from regulation A, the requirements are A, B, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? And now we need to check if we comply with that, okay? And if we go to clause 9.1.2, okay, the verification of compliance, we need to evidence that we comply with with those requirements. So those requirements, if that seems means something like what is if we comply with legislation regarding the quality of the air emissions, we need to have the evidence, the analytical results of the quality of the air emissions. If it is about the evidence that we send, the wastes are sent to certified or accredited operators or waste operators, we need to have those evidence, okay? And that it's like that. I don't know, Mick, if you are still there, and if I answered your questions, okay? Now, let's see. Mary asked, please show the presentation slide with similarities of the two standards. Okay, it's here. Oh, it's here. Okay, so I don't know, Mary, if you are still there, if you have any question, okay. But this shows, okay, at least in terms of, okay, PDCA cycle and high-level structure is not, we cannot say that there are clauses, but all the rest are clauses that are, okay, present in both. You're welcome, Mick. Okay. Okay, so yeah. So, right. So I think there are no more questions. Yeah. Let me see here if there are any questions from LinkedIn or YouTube. No. Okay, no. Right. So let's close. Okay, I think I answered all your questions. Okay. As I mentioned, this 1 hour webinar was intended to give you a general overview of integrating 9001 and 14001, not to go into a detailed discussion. For that, please take a look at our blogs. You can ask me anything about ISO 9001 or ISO 14001 directly by email. You can also download this presentation deck from our website or take a look at video tutorials and documentation templates. We'll send you the email with all necessary links. Finally, if you join this webinar through Zoom, you'll see a short survey. So I would kindly ask to you to spend a minute to fill it in. The recording of this presentation will be available in a few hours. You will receive a link to the recording. If you join the webinar through LinkedIn and YouTube, you will receive a link to the short survey now, and the link to the presentation will be posted on our event page in a few minutes. That will be all. Thank you for your participation, and I hope you enjoyed this webinar.